So that means that episode 3 will be based on the Australian Grand Prix. And I'll tell you what, I'm tired because it's been a massive weekend getting up early to watch all these sessions. And yeah, let's just say I'm thankful for the line I got this morning. So without further ado, let's get into the Australian Grand Prix. So like usual, I'm going to be going through day by day, just going through the developments we got on Friday, Saturday and Sunday, obviously in the race. And then after I've gone through it in chronological order, I'll then go through and then just sort of go through anything I may have missed in that time. So yeah, let's recap the Australian Grand Prix. Okay, so on Friday, McLaren were looking good. The Alpine looked faster than Mercedes. Ferrari were looking the better package than the Red Bull as well. They brought a couple upgrades to Australia. When Martin Brundle was trackside in, I believe, FP2, he noticed that the Mercedes were like one of the least stable cars of them all when they were doing their runs on Friday afternoon, or Friday morning, but Friday afternoon in Australia. It was a nightmare start to the weekend for Sebastian Vettel, who came back into the Aston Martin for the first time since his Bahrain testing. He was out with COVID, obviously, for the past 2 races. And he's come back from COVID with an engine issue that basically he couldn't out of Friday running FP1 and FP2. Yeah, that was an unfortunate, basically the start of an unfortunate series of events that basically ruined the entire weekend for Aston Martin. It was one of the worst weekends we've seen from a team in a very long time. And then, yeah, so the next event was amazing. We saw Seb scooter his way to the paddock, and then in the most Seb way possible, he scooted his way up to the garage. Just if you've not seen it, I'll put a picture of it on the screen right now if you're watching the video version. It was a shame that he got fined €5,000 for that. I think that's not really fair, because ultimately had to get there. I know he drove it on the track, but I mean, it's a little bit lenient. But obviously, I guess they had the regulations and stuff, the rules, and rules are rules. But yeah, either way, it was a great laugh from Seb there. So on came Saturday, where Seb's weekend went from bad to worse in FP3 as he crashed. And then we also saw that the McLaren and the Alpine were a lot faster than expected, and that the Mercedes had promising long runs, which it turned out in the race. So, qualifying. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. here in the UK. Q1 was going fairly all right, as you'd expect, until late on in Q1. It was halted with a red flag after the Stroll and Latifi incident. And well, what the hell was Stroll thinking? So just to run down if you didn't see it, Latifi let Stroll past. They're both they weren't on a push lap or anything. They're just in position to either set up a lap or come in. I think it was to set up a lap, but I'm not too sure. I think it was. But yeah, so Latifi let Stroll past, and then Stroll slowed down, and then so Latifi thought, okay, we'll just sort of sneak down past here in a place that was safe to overtake. Stroll wasn't looking in his mirrors and sort of closed in on him, and yeah, the two collided and created a red flag in Q1, and put a lot of stress on the teams as well, because yeah, the Williams and Aston Martin, they're going to really struggle with the cost cap this year. From what we've seen already in the first 3 races, they've big incidents for each team. Stroll and Albon collided in Jeddah, and they both had significant damage from the race in Jeddah. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the cost cap actually changes F1 in the near future. So it was Stroll and Latifi out in Q1, as you'd expect, as well as Seb in the Aston Martin, which we'll get to in a minute, and Kevin Magnussen in the Haas. I don't know where Haas's pace have gone. He was ill earlier in the weekend, so I guess that was it. Potentially, and then Alex Albon in the Williams in P16. So the red flag brought by Lance Stroll, Sebastian Vettel's teammate, actually allowed Vettel's mechanics to repair the car from the FP3 crash, and he managed to get out for one run with about 2 minutes remaining in Q1. He managed to out-qualify his teammate as well, which, I mean, is hardly surprising. He'd be starting 18th on Sunday's race. So Albon, who obviously qualified P16, just missing out on Q2, he was actually later disqualified from quali for failing to provide a fuel sample. You saw that he broke down at the end of Q1, going back into the pit lane. So hence why he broke down, like I said, and hence why he started P20. But I mean, he was disqualified from qualifying, and he was going to start P20 anyway because of the 3-place grid penalty from the collision with Stroll from the last race, which was an interesting one. But yeah, so Albon was back of the grid either way. So into Q2, nothing really happened, to be fair. Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez were actually faster than Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, their teammates. And then it was Tsunoda, Schumacher, Zhou, Valtteri Bottas and Pierre Gasly, who ended up getting eliminated in Q2. So Tsunoda in 15th, Gasly in 11th. No surprises there, really. It was the best 5 cars that got through into Q3. But Valtteri Bottas did lose his 103 race streak of getting into Q3. I mean, I wanted that to continue. I want Valtteri to have a really good season in the Alfa Romeo, and he is having a good season, to be fair. So Q3 saw the start of an incredible lap from Fernando Alonso, which came to an end at turn 11 after there was a hydraulic issue. It was such a shame. Honestly, he might have been on the front row of that lap. I felt so sorry for Fernando. Like, it was just the start of a nightmare weekend for him as well. Less so for Ocon. I think it was actually a pretty good race from him in the end. Fernando said afterwards in the media pen that is probably the best race weekend he's had in years up until that point. So it is a real shame to see his qualifying halted by the crash. That obviously brought out a red flag because he went off at turn 11. So the red flag actually halted Carlos Sainz's running in the start of Q3 in the first run. So Leclerc, Verstappen and Perez all got their first run in and all their lap times stood. But Carlos Sainz crossed the line after the red flag was brought out, so his lap was just taken off. It didn't count. And it was a pretty good lap as well. I think it put him P2. But yeah, so that put him on the back foot on the last run, meaning that the final run had to be it. Basically, it was like, Sainz was in the running for pole in my opinion. He had a great day on Friday. He looked like the better of the two drivers between him and Leclerc. I put him to get on pole and to win the race when I was on Euro trips on Friday, previewing the Australian Grand Prix. But yeah, so unfortunately for Sainz, he actually messed up on the final run and could only get P9. So the result in Q3 was as follows. So Charles Leclerc on pole, Max Verstappen and Red Bull alongside him, and his teammate Sergio Perez in P3, and alongside him was Lando Norris and the McLaren getting ahead of the two Mercedes in Lewis Hamilton in 5th and George Russell in P6. Ricciardo was unlucky to miss out and get P7. It was really close between the Mercedes and McLaren drivers. So Daniel Ricciardo P7, and then obviously the Alpine in a pace as well. So Esteban Ocon qualified 8th. So obviously Carlos Sainz was 9th, and it was Fernando Alonso in 10th after the crash earlier in the qualifying session. So on to the race. So Sainz and Alonso started on hard tyres as you expect, because they'd expect to go long and sort of make up the positions by going long. And then Kevin Magnussen, Sebastian Vettel, Lance Stroll and Alex Albon all opted to do the same and go on hard tyres. The rest of the grid were on mediums. The C5 soft tyre, which I don't really get why they picked C5 for the tyre compound, the soft cut tyre compound in this race. And it wasn't a race tyre, so no one used it in the race at all. And it was just too soft to go any amount of laps on this race distance. Okay, so as the 5 red lights went out, both Mercedes got ahead of both McLarens on the race start, and then it was Sergio Perez actually who got a great start in the Red Bull instead of Max Verstappen, but he actually got stuck behind Verstappen, who got the slow start and had to go up a P3 to Lewis Hamilton. So Lewis Hamilton had gained 2 places in the race start, getting past Norris and Perez, as did Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda, both the AlphaTauri drivers getting 2 places as well. As you'd expect, a lot of the hard tyre runners were struggling to get temperature in their tyres, so they were struggling early. Sainz and Alonso, the main ones that were struggling, and Sainz, he had a steering wheel issue on the grid as well, so he had to replace a normal one. The new one hadn't really mapped properly, so it was sort of a bit dodgy. There were things wrong with it, and it wasn't to the liking of Sainz, and it was causing an issue, and it went into anti-stall even literally briefly as the race started, and cars shot past him, so it went down 5 places to 14th. Sainz wasn't the only driver on the grid that had a problem before the race start. Max Verstappen had one as well. He had a problem with the hydraulic fluid in the car. GP came on the radio and said fail 20, Giampiero Lambiase, his race engineer. There was a hydraulic fluid issue. They managed to fix it, just sort of filling it just before the race, but a close shave from the Red Bull team there. So as lap 2 started, Carlos Sainz's race was over by turn 10. He went for a move on Michael Schumacher. He went for a move on Mick Schumacher and was super aggressive. He got out of sorts at turn 10 and the fast chicane, and then went into the gravel and brought out a virtual safety car. By lap 3, the virtual safety car was upgraded to a full safety car, and Lance Stroll came in twice to go onto the medium tyres, but then also back onto the hard tyres again to go the full race distance. So the safety car came in at the end of lap 6, and Max Verstappen was actually told on the radio to not go alongside Charles. So I think the FIA are trying to sort of stop that, saying, because he did it again he did it in Saudi Arabia and he did it in Jeddah. So I think because that's what he did in Abu Dhabi as well last year. So the FIA are sort of saying, Max, do not come alongside the driver in the safety car. Do not do it. It got away. Nothing really happened until the DRS kicked in lap 9. So as the DRS kicked in, it was Sergio Perez who was closing on Lewis Hamilton and for P3, and it was Daniel Ricciardo who was closing on his teammate Lando Norris for P6. So Perez couldn't quite get the move done into turn 1 on lap 10, but he had a second chance down into turn 3, shut down the inside and got it done. It was a great move from Checo, one of the best moves of the weekend, in fact. And by the end of the lap, it was actually a little DRS train between the two McLarens and the two Mercedes. Obviously, it was Hamilton, Russell, and then on the back of them it was Norris and Ricciardo. They were literally all a little DRS train for a little bit, so obviously that was hampering Daniel trying to get past Lando, which I don't think they would have stopped them anyway, but obviously it shows that Ricciardo has got the pace. And I know it was his home Grand Prix, but Daniel he's been a lot more promising this season. He's been very unlucky with, like we saw with the retirement in Jeddah. He's having a better race than Lando in Jeddah as well. So hopefully if Ricciardo's luck comes at some point, he'll be able to have a good result on that McLaren. But yeah, speaking of McLaren, in fact, their pace, they've just gone like that. I know they were suited to the high-speed corners. That's what Lando said in Bahrain. It was like, the high-speed corners are great. And obviously Australia's got a lot of high-speed corners. But, and the Haas as well. The Haas's pace has just dwindled. Obviously, the two Haas drivers and Schumacher and Magnussen 15th and 16th in qualifying. It just shows that it's like a very tight midfield, and some cars will be very good at some tracks, some cars will be out in Q1 on other tracks. It's just the way it's going to work in the midfield behind probably the Mercedes in 2022. It's great. I love it. It's like 2019 almost. Yeah, it's like 2019 almost. By the time lap 11 came round, Sebastian Vettel got his braking horribly wrong at turn 10, the fast chicane, and he went into the gravel, but managed to save the car. So it was unlike the crash in FP3. And then Max Verstappen came on the radio a lap later saying to GP, mate, my lefts are completely grained. Can we please get off these tyres, basically? But it took a couple of laps before he actually got onto the new hard tyres. And in between that time, Valtteri Bottas got past Yuki Tsunoda for P11. It had been coming for a couple of laps at turn 10 it was as well. Tsunoda was, I don't know what happened with Tsunoda. He got a great start, but he was just sort of tumbling down the orders. As Kevin Magnussen tried to get past him a lap later, he closed the gap like that. But he was a bit late on the brakes and bailed out of the move and cut the chicane at turn 10 to 11 as well. And then on lap 19, Max Verstappen finally came in for the hard tyres, following Ocon and Mick Schumacher, and Latifi, who came in a little bit earlier. It was a good stop, and he came out right in front of Alonso and Gasly, who were battling behind him. So Alonso got the move done on Pierre Gasly at turn 3, getting his way back up the order like he should have done, because he was having a great weekend before qualifying. And he was pretty close to Verstappen as well. It was from the slipstream of Verstappen as well. He was pretty close to him as well. I mean, Max was lucky he didn't get passed by Alonso then. So whilst the Alonso-Gasly battle was going on, the two Mercedes drivers were pulling away from the two McLaren drivers, particularly Lewis as well. Lewis was having a great couple of laps towards the end of the medium tyre stint. And he closed on the back of Sergio Perez on lap 20, which Sergio, a bit scared at that point as well, came in at the end of the lap for the fresh hard tyres, as did Lando Norris. Daniel Ricciardo came in on the next lap 21. He had Verstappen right behind him before pitting as well, so that probably held up Max a little bit more, which hampered him before Charles pit. And then Ricciardo came out into traffic similar to Verstappen, and he was just behind Norris as well, so didn't manage to jump his teammate. And behind him, he had Stroll and Albon battling. Stroll put a lovely move on Albon actually at turn 1, one of the only things he's done good all season, Lance Stroll. And he was very close to Daniel Ricciardo, literally very, very close. There could have been an incident at that point. An incident, as that clip's gone viral lately, hasn't it? I don't know why, it's been out for years. But so yeah, Stroll and Albon, very close to Daniel Ricciardo, almost an incident. And then Charles Leclerc came in at the end of the lap as well. So Leclerc came in, it was a really good stop as well. And he came out in P1 as well, as Lewis Hamilton dove into the pits on lap 23. Hamilton came out ahead of Perez as well, so he jumped him, but Sergio's tyres were warmer. He closed very quickly on him, and by turn 10, he was alongside him and past him. It was great racing, side by side and the sweeping straight as well. It was a great little battle between Perez and Hamilton all race. Actually, it was one of the only good points of this Grand Prix, because it was all right. It was a mare race. It wasn't as good as Bahrain or Jeddah, and much more importantly, it was much better than any race we've seen in Australia for a long time, thanks to the new cars. It would have been much cooler with the 4th DRS zone, but obviously they got rid of that because of safety reasons just before, I think it was before qualifying on Saturday morning. And then seconds after the Perez overtake on Lewis Hamilton at turn 10 and 11, the safety car was brought out because Sebastian Vettel had an off on commentary. Crofty was like, "Oh no, Not the scooter for Seb again this weekend. But yeah, so basically Vettel lost it on the curb of turn 4 at the sort of car park section, just after turn 3. And you'll see the car park spaces on there as well. And he just lost the rear after getting onto the curb, span into the wall. And it was... it brought out a safety car which sort of spiced up the race a little bit. So Alonso in P4, Magnussen in P7, and Alex Albon in P10, who were all on the hard tyres, if you remember, remained out. And then all the others yet to stop came in on for the medium, on the mediums onto the hard, sorry. So everybody on the grid was on the hard tyres at that point. And then George Russell managed to jump Sergio Perez and Lewis Hamilton, obviously, under the stop. And then Alonso was behind him in P4. So it was Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Alonso, Perez, Hamilton. On lap 27, when the safety car came in, Leclerc had a bad restart. Verstappen literally right on the back of him, wheel to wheel into turn 1. Verstappen was closing, but Leclerc held him off, and because the Ferrari was ultimately quicker, that was the biggest sniff Verstappen had at a race victory in the Grand Prix. So Sergio Perez was within DRS on lap 30 of Fernando Alonso. He didn't get the move done on turn 1, but he set it perfectly into turn 1 and turn 2. So he sort of breezed past him in turn 3. It was a great move from Perez. He's one of my drivers of the day. Spoiler alert for later. It won't be him. There's somebody else who is driver of the day, but Perez had a very good race. And we saw this little battle between Lando Norris and Kevin Magnussen for a couple of laps. So Magnussen on the hard tyres, he stayed out obviously in P7. Lando on the new hard tyres in P8, trying to get up to P7 again. So on lap 33, Norris went for a move down the inside of Magnussen on turn 3, a very aggressive move actually. He went round the outside, but Magnussen stayed ahead, and it actually allowed Daniel Ricciardo to sort of catch up to them as well. So there's a little three-way battle there between Magnussen, Norris and Ricciardo. And then on the lap 34, the next lap, obviously, down the main straight, the two McLarens had DRS on Magnussen. Magnussen locked up at turn 13, the heavy braking zone just before the main straight in the last lap, and he was reeling from it, and he was a sitting duck for Norris. Ricciardo couldn't get past, he backed out at turn 1 and turn 3. He could have got a move done at turn 3, but he got close, but not close enough. He managed to get ahead of him down the main straight on lap 35, though, giving the Australian fans something to cheer. So Ricciardo up to P8, and Magnussen had a P9. A couple of laps later, on lap 36, Perez, who had been on the back of George Russell for a little bit, he was literally moments away from getting past, and then Russell's engineer came onto the radio and said that the tyre management is more important than battling for position, which is true, but he was like, that's not what I want to hear. And then shortly after, he touches the grass on the sort of sweeping straight, the new profiled straight, and then into turn 11, the new profiled heavy braking zone corner to the right, which would allow for more overtaking because of the braking zone got brought back. By the time that Perez and Russell got to turn 11, it was Perez round in that corner ahead. And then the race sort of hit a little bit of a lull at that point, going to sort of like lap 40. And then just when we needed a little bit of entertainment, Max Verstappen was gone. Like we said, it was I was just like, I would have sort of maybe shouted if it wasn't 6 a.m. at that point, and I was sort of, on the coffee, just trying to sort of mask my way through the morning. But yeah, I was speechless when Max pulled over to the side. It was yet another power unit issue for the Red Bull Powertrains team as well, and it's starting to look a little bit like 2018 with the Renault power unit, where it was just early in the season, it was race after race after race retirement with a power unit issue. We saw many of them in 2018, and that was part of the reason why Red Bull went to Honda, of course. So we got a replay of Max coming onto the radio and saying, "I smell weird fluid, everything is shitting itself," and he just said that on the radio, and it was unclear whether this issue was the same one as he had on the grid before. If you remember, I was talking about that earlier. It was believed to be a fuel leak, so it wasn't that. It just proves there's a lot of reliability concern with that new Red Bull power unit. So because Verstappen sort of parked it to the side and was out of the way, it brought out the virtual safety car, which was only out for a little bit of time, but it did allow Alonso and Magnussen to come in for the medium tyres, but Albon didn't. He stayed out, and I think that was a bit of a genius strategy from Alex Albon as well, actually. He was sitting in P7. So the VSC sort of quickly ended, and then over the next couple of laps, Perez came onto the radio and said, what happened to Max? Will it happen to me? And they was told, don't worry about it, it's not an issue of our car. So it looked like it was specific to Max's car, which sort of says maybe fuel leak was the one. And then also during that time period, Lance Stroll received a 5-second time penalty for weaving on a straight. And that kind of ruined his race as well, because he was in the points at that point. I think it was P9. It took a little bit of time for Alonso and Magnussen to get their tyres up to temperature, the mediums as well, which was interesting to move up the field. But he did get past Mick Schumacher for P12 on lap 45. And then on the same lap, Magnussen in P16 was having the same problem, obviously, but pulled off a great move on Yuki Tsunoda at turn 11, the corner I was just on about. And he shot down the inside for P15. And yeah, the sort of reason behind that as well is because there were loads of cars together, were really close together. At that point, there were 3 seconds between Lance Stroll in 9th and Guan Yu Zhou in 14th. So it was a great scrap for the last few points. But yeah, so by lap 51, Lance Stroll's tyres were dead. Obviously, he's been on it since almost the very start. He was getting passed by at first Pierre Gasly on lap 51, and then Bottas a lap later on lap 52. And then on lap 53, obviously, Fernando Alonso's got the new medium tyres on. He came onto the radio and said they're grained, and then he stopped. He just started dropping down the field. So Zhou Guanyu got past him, then Kevin Magnussen, and then Mick Schumacher as well. And then he eventually came in for new mediums. So that ruined Fernando's race. He would have got about 8th or 9th at that point. Really unfortunate for Fernando, who, if he had that great lap, probably would have got a podium this weekend. Oh yeah, and then on lap 54, Charles Leclerc came on and said, "Can we go for fastest lap?" When he already had it just before they hit traffic. And then he was told, no one can get it, so don't worry. And then he was like, okay, which has become a little bit of a meme as well. That was his response on the radio. And then lap 55, we saw Valtteri Bottas get past Pierre Gasly, who locked up at turn 13 on the lap previous, and Bottas breezed past for P9 at the time. And then on lap 58 of 58, Alex Albon came in. He went 57 laps on the hard tyres, and he came out in P10 just in front of Zhou Guanyu. And fair play to him, he was setting really good lap times at the end of the stint on hard tyres. There was sort of the McLaren drivers. The Williams had really hit a groove with that hard tyre, and he created a pit stop gap on the last few laps, and he dove in and got the final point. And Williams getting points yet again. Obviously, they're a very sort of budget-strapped team. They're one of the smallest teams not really one of the smallest teams, but one of the they've been struggling for a while in Formula 1, so it was great to see. And yeah, as Latifi's looking more and more like a really bad driver, Alex Albon is showing just how good of a driver he is, and why he deserved a seat in Formula 1 last year after his unfortunate year in 2020. But obviously, that was it. That was the Australian Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc, who we've not really mentioned because he literally led the race from start to finish. He got the fastest lap, got pole position. It's the Grand Slam. He got everything, did Charles Leclerc, and it's the first time I've done it in his career, and he was unstoppable. You get a 10 out of 10 from me if I was Ed Straw on the race, who has some very interesting race grades that I've seen over the past couple of races. I think, maybe he's doing it just for sort of traction on Twitter, maybe, but there's some interesting ones from the race on there after that. They've had a couple Grand Prix in a row. But yeah, so basically a dominant victory for Charles Leclerc, who really, really deserves this. He's gone through 2 years of really unfortunate luck, with the Ferrari being punished in 2020 and then rebounding in 2021. It's good to see him back at the front of the grid in 2022 and leading the World Drivers' Championship as well. So, as a rundown, obviously it was Charles Leclerc in P1, Sergio Perez had a great race in P2, George Russell closed out the podium in P3. He was a bit fortunate to get past Lewis and Perez, obviously, in the pit stop after the safety car. But George and Lewis both had good races, so either way, one of them deserved the podium. And then Lando Norris in P5 and Daniel Ricciardo, great home race, one of the best home race weekends he's had in a long time, in P6. So it would have been great to see him get on a podium, but it just wasn't to be. The Mercedes were faster in race pace. Esteban Ocon in P7, Valtteri Bottas in P8, Pierre Gasly in P9. Those three had great races as well, being the sort of top of the sort of lower midfield at that point. And then Alex Albon in P10, closing out the points positions. Zhou Guanyu was unlucky to not get points. Obviously, Albon pipped him just in the last lap in P11. Lance Stroll actually had a pretty good race after the crash on Saturday in qualifying. Obviously, he started P19 and got P12. The hard tyres, he basically had the same race as Albon, just Albon did it a little bit better, and could hold the tyres on for a lot longer as well. Stroll and Albon go for the best strategy, and both of them having a pretty good result for the torrid cars they've got. And then it was the two Haas drivers of Schumacher and Magnussen. Like I said, I think the way this year is going to go with the midfield, it's going to be quite track specific. So seeing the Haas struggle this week, they might be really good at Imola, you never know. And then Yuki Tsunoda, who again was sort of hampered by the safety car in P15. Nicholas Latifi in P16, and then Alonso just sort of behind the rest in P17 after his second stop. But yeah, so the Australian Grand Prix was pretty good. I really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait for the race in Imola at the end of April.